Welcome to the Successful Athletes Podcast presented by TrainerRoad, where we interview successful athletes to make you faster. And today we have a special episode with a TrainerRoad user, Cam Summerson. How you doing, Cam?
I'm good, man. How's it going?
Going great. We're going to take a bit of a different approach. You are episode 4 of this podcast. You have not set an Everesting world record that I know of. Have you set one since we spoke last?
I have not. No.
Okay, cool. This isn't one necessarily about a specific race result, but success has very different measures and different ways to be able to define that success. And you actually shared this story with us some time ago, and it struck us as something that really defined like a true measure of success, at least in my perspective. And as soon as we're organizing this podcast, you've been on the list since the beginning. So it's really exciting to have you on, man. And I appreciate you doing it. First things first, can you just introduce yourself really quick, like basic stuff, where you're from, what you do for work, how old you are, and of course, since we're cycling nerds, weight and FTP too, so then we can get a good context.
Yeah, my name's Cameron, Cameron Summerson. Everybody just calls me Cam. I live in Texarkana, Arkansas. I work remotely, so I'm the editor-in-chief of a website called Review Geek. We're a tech website. I try to get as much bike stuff on there as I can, but it's, you gotta cater to the audience. But so I'm 38. I weigh 145, and FTP currently is 216. So I'm 3.2-ish watts per kg.
Awesome. Perfect. Good background, especially for this podcast, right? It's a slightly different one. So what we're going to talk about today with you, I think really revolves around motivation. Yeah. And that's a key thing for all of us that are athletes that are training, is to align with the motivation that really connects with each of us and is sufficient to drive us even through the tough times. And Cam, in your situation, it's probably best just to jump right in and explain your son, Axton or Axe, explain his situation is probably the best place to start.
Yeah. So, just to get straight to it, he was diagnosed with end-stage renal disease, kidney failure, when he was 3 years old. So it was actually exactly 2 months before his third birthday. So he was right at 3 years old. It was the day after Christmas. He was diagnosed, is when we first took him to the hospital. He was diagnosed with ESRD. He had maybe 10% kidney function at that time, and within 2 weeks, it was gone. So he had zero kidney function at that point, and this has been something that had been going on for a long time, and we had no idea. So at that point, he had to go on dialysis, and we were told right then that he would need a kidney transplant. And we knew that was something we were going to have to look toward. But he was so small. We had some time to get him up to the point where he could accept a transplant. So that's pretty much where my story gets serious. Before that, go ahead.
So was he? In this case with, and perhaps like a name for the condition that he really had, like you said, a renal disease, but you had mentioned FSGS is a way to kind of summarize it as well, or another way to be able to explain it. Was this a fatal condition as well? For him?
Yeah, if they literally told us the day that we took him in that if we would have waited 24 more hours to bring him in, he probably wouldn't have made it. So he was that close. He was that close to not being with us anymore. And that was hard to hear, but yeah, it's FSGS was his official diagnosis. And basically what that is scarring of the kidneys. So the body sort of attacks the kidneys in people with this disease and scars them to the point where they no longer function. And that's what happened to him. Is literally a fluke. It's a one in, I don't know. I don't know the exact number, but it's like a 1 in a million chance of it happening. They said we could have 100,000 more kids and it would probably never happen again.
What signs did you see that this was the case with him, and when did you start seeing them?
So it's interesting because actually it goes all the way back to when he was born, because he was born with a skin tag right beside his ear. And the ears and kidneys are formed at the same time and in the womb. And they checked his kidneys at birth because of that skin tag. And they said, no, everything looks good. They did an ultrasound, everything functioned, everything was fine. But he was always really small. And I'm only 5'6". My wife is 5'4", so we're both pretty small. So we expect to have a small child. But it got to the point where I would say we really started to notice maybe around 2 years old that he wasn't really growing well. So we took him to a doctor, and they suspected that he might have a gluten intolerance. So we put him on a gluten-free diet, and within a few months of that, he started to gain weight. And we thought that that was a sign that the gluten-free diet was working, but actually his kidney function was declining, and he was holding on to fluid. So all the weight he had gained was artificial. It wasn't real weight. It was literally fluid buildup in his body. And he would wake up. The first signs that we saw were he would have real like bags under his eyes. And we worked with the doctor, and they said it was probably allergies. Again, that sounds pretty logical to me, but that was the first sign of the fluid retention. And it really got to the point where we knew something was wrong in Christmas of 2014, because at Christmas he got the flu, and he was just so sick. He was on the couch. He wouldn't get up to come open gifts, nothing. And my wife noticed that he had like his legs looked swollen, and she did some research to find out what that could be, and she came across something called nephrotic syndrome. And the next day it was even worse. So I took him to the ER, and it was just a small ER. We lived in Rockwall, Texas at the time. I took him to a small ER. They checked him for edema, and the doctor looked at me and he said, "Here's what I need you to do." He's like, "I need you to put him back in your car and drive him to the Children's Hospital in Dallas. I'm not going to charge you for this visit, but I need you to do this right now. And if you don't think that you're capable of doing that, I'm going to call an ambulance and have them take you." So I knew something was really wrong at that point. And we spent the night. We got to the hospital about 7 p.m. They did some tests. They put a catheter in to try to get a urine sample, and his bladder was completely dry. He was very dehydrated from fever, and we had no idea. I mean, we'd been giving him water, but his bladder was dry because his kidneys just basically were at basically the minimum function to still have function. And literally we got the results of that back at like midnight. And by 7 a.m. the next morning, he was in surgery to get a hemodialysis catheter straight into his heart. And by 9 a.m. he was on dialysis the next day. So it was, yeah.
That's extreme. So rapid. I can't, having a 3-year-old son, that's pretty terrifying to hear this. What was his condition like when he was on dialysis? Like, what were things like for him?
So he started off on hemodialysis, like I just said, which is basically what people think of when they think of dialysis. Most older people get it, and it's in their arm. But with a child that small, it was straight into his heart. So basically they pull the blood out, pull off the excess fluid, put the blood back. It's really, really hard on him at first, just because a child that small, they literally have to pull so much blood out of the body at one time and then put it back in. So it was hard on him. And it took them probably 2 months to get all the excess fluid pulled off, because they have to pull it off slowly. And when they did, he was basically skin and bone. And I mean, I'm not even exaggerating. He was so weak, he could barely stand on his own. By the time we were in the hospital when he was first diagnosed, we were in the hospital for about 3 weeks. And then they let us go home, and we had to come back 4 times a week for dialysis. But by the time they got all the fluid pulled off, yeah, he was skin and bone. He had lost, I mean, he was, I can't even remember exactly how much he weighed, but he was very, very frail. And so weak, he could barely stand on his own. So it was, yeah, it was hard. It was really hard. And I remember looking at him and thinking, like, is he ever going to be the same again? Because he was so tired. He never wanted to play. I mean, dialysis is hard on adults. So what it does to a child is just, but he's, it's like, I know we're talking about motivation, and to me, that's the crazy thing about it is, like, I talked to several adults who were on dialysis to try to understand like what he might be going through. And I watched videos, and and interviews of adults on dialysis, and they were all talking about how hard it was. But with him, he never complained. All I ever saw out of him was, regardless of how weak he was, he still tried to. He wanted to play. He wanted to be on his tablet. He wanted to do things that he did before, and that will, that push to just be normal, was just, it was unreal. It was so powerful to me, to watch him just strive to be himself. Even though, I mean, it was really really hard on him. And after 3 months on hemo, they said, hey, you have the option of switching him over to peritoneal dialysis, which can be done at home. It's much longer sessions, and you do it every night, but it can be done at home and it's easier on the body. And we were like, that sounds like a win-win. So we switched over. He was on dialysis for 12 hours a night. And we did it. It was overnight completely. And we did it at home, and he did much better on that. It's you deal with cramping a lot with that, because again, it's like it'll pull all the fluid off the body. Even fluid it shouldn't pull off the body gets pulled off. So you have to make sure that, trying to find that right water balance. Like, he has to have water, but he can't have too much water. And then diet restrictions. Those were, it was all things we had to consider. But the peritoneal dialysis was actually great for him. And he did really, really well on that.
So that was 12 hours a night. And
Mm-hmm.
would he be able to sleep through that time?
Yeah.
Just fine. Yeah. But still, I imagine uncomfortable just the same.
Yeah. So peritoneal, basically, it's like the inside behind the stomach, there's a peritoneal cavity, and it's I don't even understand how people figure this stuff out, because it's fascinating to me. But so basically, there was a tube that went into past his stomach into this cavity, and the machine, then the dialysis machine, fills that cavity with peritoneal, with this fluid that pulls liquid through the peritoneal cavity, and then it's flushed back out. It's crazy. It's the craziest thing. Like, it's just so bizarre to me how somebody even figured out how to do this. So yeah, but like you said, it is uncomfortable because he's filled with just a lot of fluid. So it's like, if you think about, if you eat too much or if you drink too much and you just feel really, really full, I imagine that's how he felt. And then when the fluid would come off every night, he would wake up, because it's like it fills and then it sits for like an hour and a half, and then drains back off and does it all over again for 12 straight hours. And every time it would drain back off, he would cramp. So he would wake up uncomfortable, crying because he was cramping. And then he'd be fine once the fluid was put back in place. So yeah, it's definitely not ideal, but it was a lot easier on his body than hemo was.
How long-term of a solution was that for him?
So peritoneal dialysis, it's easier on the body, but it's still not a permanent solution for anyone on it, because what happens over time is that peritoneal cavity breaks down, or the peritoneal wall, rather, it starts to break down. The more you use it, the more it breaks down. So it's a longer term solution, but for someone his age, it's not something that could have sustained him through his life. A kidney transplant was the only solution. And it's one of those things where if he ever has to go back on dialysis, hopefully that peritoneal wall will be healed enough so he'll be able to go back on PD without any issues.
So when did you guys make a decision to continue the treatment beyond PD and to start to look at other options? And what brought that about?
So the transplant option?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, so when we were first in the hospital, so they did a biopsy after we were there for 3 days to figure out if this was acute or if this was chronic kidney failure. Because interestingly, I've never heard of this, but there are certain illnesses like strep throat that can cause acute kidney failure in children. And then once that's gone, then the kidney failure will come back up. So they did a biopsy and concluded it was chronic. And when they came to talk to us about that and tell us that it was chronic, they said he'll need a kidney transplant. And I said, he can have one of mine. I mean, there was just no question. He can have one of mine. And, my wife and I talked about it shortly after that. And we both decided that, yeah, I mean, it just made the most sense for me to be the one, because she couldn't take care of, if she were to do it, I can't work and take care of her and take care of him all at the same time. And my wife, at the time when Axe was diagnosed, she worked. But pretty much as soon as he was diagnosed, she was like, I'm not going back to work. That's her sole focus is him. So she has been mother, teacher, nurse since, I mean, really since day one. But like once that's when she really stepped up. So and I'm the only one who works outside the home. I mean, I work from home, but so it just made more sense, plus it just made more sense. And my mom helped a lot. So basically Corey stayed, that's my wife. She stayed with Axe when he was in the hospital after transplant. And I stayed with my mom, and my mom took care of me because I could barely walk on my own. So it really just made sense. But yeah, I mean, that was a conversation that we had, and it was pretty much a no-brainer. I would go first, and then if I wasn't a match, then she would be tested.
So what did you have to do to become a donor? Because it's a noble thing and also an understandable thing for a father to say, whatever I can do. But what was the response from the medical team, and what sort of things did you have to go through in order for that to happen?
So I'm gonna back up just a little bit to before Axe was diagnosed. To basically the start of when I started riding bikes, because I was 210 pounds when I started riding. And like I said earlier, I'm 145 today. So I was overweight, like very overweight. Like I said, I'm 5'6". So I knew something had to be done. And I got a bike and I started riding. And then I started to watch what I ate more. And I was down to, I think I was down to like probably around 170 when Axe was first diagnosed. I don't remember exactly, but and then by the time we were out of the hospital, I was down to 155 because I just literally didn't eat for 3 weeks. But then after we got home and things started to settle in, then the stress eating started, and I put a bunch of weight back on, so I was back up to like 180. But then, the more we thought about the more I thought about me being the donor, the potential donor. Before any testing started, I knew that I had to get myself into shape. And that's really when I really started taking things seriously to get in the best shape that I've ever been in. And so I started at 180, and then I worked my way down to like I think it was about 160 or so by the year he was going to get transplanted. So he got transplanted in October of, oh man, my years run together. October of 2017 is when he got transplanted. So it'll be 3 years this year. So at the beginning of 2017, I was about 160, 165, and I knew we knew that was the year. And that's when I was also going to start going through all the testing to be compatible, because they won't test anybody until we're like within a few months of transplant, because interestingly, people can be a match and then they can no longer be a match. It's really weird because it's more than just blood type. Like blood type is obviously one of the key things, but they're oh man, I had to go through so many tests. But I knew if your BMI is too high, they won't let you be a donor. If your blood pressure is high, they won't let you be a donor. So I knew I had to be in good shape, and that's when I started using TrainerRoad and really taking riding seriously. Because before that, I was a very casual cyclist. It was like, oh, I just want to ride bikes and lose weight. And then I was like, okay, now it's time to start doing more. Started using TrainerRoad, which, man, I think about this all the time, but that first, like the base phase, literally life-changing. I mean, literally life-changing, more than just getting me in better shape. I lost a ton of weight just doing the base phase, and it made me so much stronger. That I was always one of the slowest guys in the group that I rode with. After the base phase, I was no longer the slowest guy. I was the one setting the pace. So it was seriously game changing. And then of course, because I was faster, I rode more, burned off more calories. I mean, it just snowballed in the best possible way from there. And even though it was just like, when I look at the big picture, that 12 weeks is relatively a short time over the whole time I was losing weight, it was the most significant by far, the most meaningful portion of anything that I did to get ready for transplant. So go ahead.
I was just going to say, stepping back, so you had to be a healthy individual and go through all of that. And the motivation for that, I mean, I can't imagine it's for a lot of us, geez, like, not to make light of all of our individual situations here, but a lot of the time we're just shooting for a result that isn't even going to get us like a blue ribbon,
Yeah.
But it's enough it's enough to motivate us perhaps, but maybe not on all the days. What was it like approaching training with that sort of thing? Riding with other people that are cyclists that are probably, who knows what their goals are, but your goal was to literally save your son's life.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's the motivation that can be pulled from that it's unlike anything that I think I can really put into words, because, you get in the middle of a hard interval, or you're on you feel like you're on a hard group ride or a race or whatever, and you feel like your heart rate is redlined and you can't go any harder and you just want to quit. But then for me, I think about this child who is, he was, 4 years old, 5 years old, almost 5 at the time. And just the most inspiring person I've ever known in my life, because, going back to what I said earlier, the motivation for him to try to get back to normal, I can remember he could barely move. And I was laying beside him and I had his tablet right after he was diagnosed. I had his tablet leaned up on my shirt or on my chest, and all he could do was move his arm. But that's what he had that will, that drive to not give up. And that was so motivating to me. And I thought about every time I wanted to give up, I would think about everything he'd been through and think about just watching him overcome every obstacle that was put in front of him. And there's nothing more motivating. There's nothing more motivating. Like he's honestly, people say that I've had so many people be like, oh, you're a hero, or you saved his life. But honestly, he's my hero. Like he's just so motivating. I wouldn't be I wouldn't be who I am, honestly, without the experience and without his inspiration in my life.
Yeah, it's incredible. What were the challenges you faced when you were training like this? You mentioned that you had lost weight, but then you had rapid weight gain and then coming back into it. What was hard in the beginning of the training process when you got started?
Life stress more than anything else. You can imagine how stressful it is to have a chronically ill child, and every single day is a new issue. So it's like when I tell the story, a lot of times I tell it, in very broad strokes. It's like, oh, well, this happened, then this other big event happened, then this third big event happened. But the nuances from day to day, the things that happen, every single day with, maybe his blood pressure is high, or maybe his blood pressure is low, or maybe we think he's coming down with something, or, his test results aren't right. Literally every single day, it was something new. So all those stresses built up, and I know you guys talk about this on the TrainerRoad podcast, the Ask a Cycling Coach podcast all the time, but life stress makes training hard. And that was the biggest thing. But at the same time, I also used that life stress as a motivator, because it was like, how do I make this situation better? By being stronger right now, by getting stronger right now, getting in the best shape of my life and helping fix this. So yeah, but that was by far the biggest hurdle was all the stress.
Did you have to make changes to your training as a result of that? Like, were there days where you had to make adjustments, or what sort of volume did you train on, and how did you manage that one bad day to another?
Definitely. It was, there were, like, if I knew that he would see his nephrologist once a month when he was on dialysis. We'd meet with his dialysis team, meet with his nephrologist. And on those days when I knew that was coming, I would get up and train early in the morning, because we were going to be at the hospital pretty much all day and stuff. And there were weeks where, we would be admitted to the hospital. If one of his levels was off, they would admit us immediately. And then at that point, I would know I was going to miss at least a week's worth of training, because we were going to be in the hospital the whole time. So yeah, it was definitely, there were ebbs and flows. No question about it, where I would have to adjust things and, take every single day as it comes, and get the training in where I could. Sometimes it was late at night. Sometimes it would be 9 p.m. before I was even getting on a trainer. But that's that's just what it was.
Did you ever find, so sometimes we have a goal and it's so it means so much to us, and in this case, absolutely, it means everything.
Yeah.
That it can be kind of difficult to manage things at times, if that makes sense. And I guess what I'm getting at here is, uh, were there any difficulties that came with having a true life or death situation as your motivation? Did that compromise your training at all? Did you find yourself making mistakes, I would say, or pushing yourself too far? Or did you ever find yourself in a situation like that? Or did you, like you said, just kind of march along and manage it well?
I pretty much just marched along with it. And I'm sure, like looking back on it now, I have a totally different perspective on training and how I should go about it than I did then. I'm sure that there were definitely days when I overreached and didn't manage the fatigue or whatever as well as I should have. But yeah, I mean, it was the never give up, the don't let it beat me mentality that just really pushed me. Even on the days when I didn't feel like doing it, I was doing it anyway. So yeah, I'm sure there were times when I overreached.
Did you have other goals as well? Like this big goal that is, so impactful. Did you have other goals that you set yourself for motivation? Or did you just hold on to the big one?
It was really just the big one. It was really the big one that just kept me going. But it's interesting because motivation and goals are they're dynamic. So it started off with just this big goal, but then when I started to see myself get faster, that became more motivating. And when I was no longer at the back of the group ride, but I was the one pulling the group ride, like that was motivating. And so I would have, I'm sure there were like micro goals that I would set for myself throughout. I mean, I probably couldn't even tell you what one of them is right now, but well, I guess, you know what, I can take that back. Like I had never ridden a century before that. And it was like, that was a goal. That was something I wanted to do. And that was a very cycling oriented goal, was to ride a century. And a group of close friends of mine who I absolutely love dearly, they got together, planned a route, didn't tell me anything about it. They planned the route. And then they were like, hey, we're all going out. We're taking you on a century. It was my last ride before transplant. They were like, we're taking you, because I was off the bike for like 3 months after that. They were like, we're taking you, we're going to go do a century ride. So they helped me achieve that goal just by setting it all up. The fitness was there, but yeah, I mean, and there were a bunch of micro goals, I would say, throughout the entire process like that just kept me going. I mean, it's not like it really needed much to help me keep going, but they were nice things to meet.
How did you know that you were ready for transplant?
So I started all the testing in, I think it was April. It was either March or April. It's on my Instagram, actually. I'd have to scroll way back and find it, but I posted the very first blood draw. Actually, I posted when I filled out the living donor application. So you fill out an application, then they start blood work. And then from there, you have to, I had to go through a ton of physical tests, blood work. I had to go through an emotional and mental screening with a psychologist. Just because there's so much that goes into this, because there are things you don't think about. I had to talk to a psychologist about, well, how will you handle it mentally if, let's say, because there's a chance he could have gotten my kidney and it could have rejected immediately, and then I did all this work and I did all this to try to save his life, and then could have been, quote unquote, for nothing. They want to know how you handle that kind of situation, which fortunately that's not how it played out. But yeah, I mean, those are things that have to be thought about. But anyway, I went through all that. And then finally, we got the call, hey, you're a match. Everything is approved. Everything is perfect. And then they run one final test, literally like 3 days before transplant, because like I said, you can be a match and become not a match, unmatched, I guess. It's really bizarre. But they ran that one test 3 days before and they were like, we're good to go. Let's do this.
Cool. Well, this is what amount of stress before that last test, huh?
Oh man.
I can't imagine.
The pressure is unreal.
Yeah, I can't imagine. So, first things first, and most importantly, post operation, was it a success for Axe? And then what is Axe's condition like as a result of this? And I guess even up to now.
Yeah, it was a success for him. There's always, like I said, there's always a chance that the kidney may not work. It could reject. I mean, there are a bunch of issues. So what's interesting is most people find this fascinating, but we had the operations at 2 different hospitals because he was at a children's hospital and they don't operate on anyone 18 and over, on very few circumstances. So there's an adult hospital a mile down the road. And that's where my surgeon was. That's where I was. I was there with my mom, and then Axe and my wife were at the children's hospital. So they started the process at UT Southwestern in Dallas and took my kidney and then threw it in an ice chest, transferred it over, and then my surgeon stitched me all up, and then he left, went to children's. So he was there for the final connections in Axe. They started my surgery. An hour later, they started his. Which I think is just, it's so cool. It's so cool. Like I said, most people find that pretty fascinating, and I think it's really cool too. So, but yeah, I mean, I don't remember a whole lot from that day. Obviously I was pretty out of it. But I do remember, obviously when I first woke up, my mom was with me, and my first question, have you heard from Corey? How was Axe? And he was doing great. And I stayed in touch with her. She sent me, I still remember. So, the whole 3 years after his kidneys completely failed, he didn't pee. Like, he didn't pee at all because he had nothing to make pee. So I still remember the first picture she sent me of he was in a diaper, and it was one of the ones that shows when he's wet. And that is a very emotional picture for me to see, because it was like, hey, this is working. And so my kidney was in him doing its thing. And he snapped back. The doctors told me, his nephrologist is one of the greatest human beings I've ever met in my life. So shout out to Dr. Cycli at Children's. I got to give much love to him. But he told me, he said, I'm going to tell you right now, this is going to be a lot harder on you than it is on him. And I was relieved to hear that, because I wanted it to be my turn to take the punishment for a while, to give him a break. And it was like, he snapped back so fast from the surgery. They anticipated he would be in the hospital for 3 weeks while they adjusted meds, made sure the kidney didn't reject, fine-tuned everything. He was out of the hospital after like 8 or 9 days, just because everything was just working so well. And I still remember laying on the couch at my mom's house, watching TV, because I'm 2 weeks post-transplant. It is hard to even walk at that point for me. And he's running around the living room like a crazy kid. And I'm like, I just remember like just how amazing that felt to see him. Like, it was the best he had felt in, you could just tell it was the best he had felt in years. And it was amazing.
How cool. Must have felt incredible to know, like, to look back probably at all those moments of suffering that you had. They probably seemed like, well, of course I would have never quit, right? They were probably minimized in terms of the suffering that you endured, or their worth was probably magnified.
Yeah, absolutely. It was, it's interesting, because when I think about one of the hardest things after transplant that I never anticipated was how hard it was going to be just to get out of the bed. And before I could even leave the hospital, they made me walk a lap around the floor. And they cut open, they took the kidney from the front. I know your kidneys are in the back, but they took it from the front. So they sliced through all my core muscles. And you don't realize how much you use core muscles until they're not there, but even just to get out of bed. And when I think back on that, that was probably one of the hardest things I've ever had to do in my life, was get up out of that bed and walk around that hospital floor. And one of the fascinating things to me about TrainerRoad and using TrainerRoad is it just shows you how deep you can go. When you think you can't, you definitely still can. And TrainerRoad taught me that more than anything I've ever done in my life. And during that time, when I had to get out of bed and walk around the floor, that's immediately where my brain went. My mind went to these, over under VO2 max intervals. And I mean, it sounds it almost sounds silly to say it out loud like that, but it's seriously where my brain goes. It's like, hey, there was this thing you did that was really, really hard, but you did it. And this is no different. So, to me, it's, there's so much more to this type of training than just, hey, let's get stronger on bikes. Like that mental aspect was so huge for me. And it's why, like you said, when I first shared this story, I shared it as how TrainerRoad helped me save my son. And it was so much more to me than just getting in better shape. There was that mental, that dig deep mentality that I didn't realize how deep I could dig until I had to do it. And then I've used that. I've applied that in so many areas of my life. And then the transplant, that was definitely a huge one for me.
So you mentioned it was like a 3-month recovery that you had.
Yeah.
And what was it? When did you get back on the bike? And then I'm sure that, like, as you mentioned, kind of your suffering had really just begun in a lot of ways. It was time for Axe to take a break, hopefully, relatively speaking, and your suffering had just begun. When did you get back on the bike, and what was the recovery like for that?
So I was off the bike. I was cleared to ride, to get back on, indoors only, and very easy after, I think it was like 6 weeks. So 6 weeks, they were like, nothing outside, take it easy. So I literally just did like pet it, and not even that long, 30 minutes at a time. So like volunteer or something.
Dan's or volunteer. Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. So just really short rides. And oh man, that first ride, I was absolutely exhausted. 30-minute recovery ride. And and my heart rate was probably 20 beats higher per minute than normal. But, looking back on it now, it's like, it's obvious. My body was going through a lot. There was a lot of work being done on the inside. So my body was just working harder. So I did. And I stayed at that easy pace like that for probably at least a month. I would extend up to maybe an hour, but that was still it. And I didn't spend a whole lot of time doing much of anything until 3 months. And then after 3 months, they were like, you're pretty much good to go now. All like my stitches, everything was healed. My body, they said it would take a year for my single kidney to, it physically would increase in size to pick up the slack from where the other kidney was gone, which I thought was pretty fascinating. So they said it would take a year for that to happen. And I didn't really notice much of a difference after probably 3 or 4 months. I couldn't really even tell. And to this day, I don't feel any different than I did before now. So, but yeah, so after 3 months, I was able to start picking my training back up. And it was harder than starting for the first time, I think. Well, maybe, I don't know. I was pretty big when I started the first time, and there were some struggles there, but it snapped back pretty fast. But it was that first training block after that 3 months was hard. It was rough.
You mentioned some of the kind of like longer term effects in terms of just having, one kidney left. Did you have to make any change to your training or nutrition as a result of that? And as it stuck with you, that change?
Yeah. So I did actually, I had to talk to them about that. And the main thing that they told me was to watch my protein intake. So I have to watch my protein intake closely because that's broken down in the kidneys. And with only one kidney, if you take in too much protein, I mean, I guess it's true for even if you have 2 kidneys, but if you eat too much protein, the kidneys can't keep up, and it's long-term, it's bad. It's bad for the kidneys. So that's really the main thing. They said everything else would be about the same. They made sure that like when I'm out on the bike, because I mean, it's, I live right on the border of Texas and Arkansas, and it's going to be like 100 degrees today. So it gets hot. So they're like, make sure you have electrolyte drink and, stuff that I was doing already, but it's just like, that's just cemented in my brain. And then, other small things like I'm not supposed to take Aleve or Advil or any NSAID, no aspirin, stuff like that. So just little things like that. But other than those things, I didn't really have to change anything else. They did tell me they pushed, I don't race, and I've never really raced. I've done some gravel races, and that's still something I enjoy doing. I never really, I like to push. I'm more of a race with myself kind of person, not necessarily like race for the podium kind of thing.
Sure. Yeah.
Just because I'm very, very competitive, like aggressively so, and I don't want to get to that point.
Yeah. Yeah.
But they did push me away from, like, they're like, look, you know, you don't race bikes. We don't really recommend you ever race bikes, especially crits, just because it's not a huge possibility that my kidney could get damaged, but it's the option, or the possibility is always there. If I were to go down, you know, something could do something to that one single kidney. So, but other than that, nothing in terms of like riding bikes or training or anything like that.
Sure. Yeah. Makes sense. So you going back on the bike, uh, was and is your motivation still the same, or what replaced that motivation after?
Man, that is an excellent question, and it's been one that I'll really be honest with you, I've struggled with, because it's you reach there's this goal, you know, you have this enormous goal, and when you reach that pinnacle, you hit the top of that mountain. Where do you go from there? And it's hard to find motivation, and it's hard to everything else compared to that goal is small, and you have to put yourself in a new mindset. And it was a real struggle for me, because I still loved riding bikes, obviously, and I still do to this day. But to have that motivation to go hard and to dig deep, there was more of an excuse, honestly, to let myself off the hook, to go, yeah, you don't have to do this today. It's not that big of a deal. And to find that motivation again, it was a real challenge. And I spent probably the best part of a year trying to figure out where it comes from after that. And I think the thing is, like, to this now, I still don't really have a good answer for that. It's, you know, it's just small things now. It's about being a better me. It's about being a stronger me. It's about living a longer, healthier life, because Axe still has he still has a long road ahead of him. For the rest of his life, this is going to be something he deals with, because a kidney transplant is not a it's a band-aid more than it doesn't fix the original problem. There's a chance that his FSGS could come back and attack the new kidney. It's just because it lives in his body. And at some point, I mean, transplanted kidneys, even from living donors, they have a longer lifespan than ones from deceased donors. But at some point in his life, he's going to need another kidney. And I know that, and I can't give it to him, but I can be strong for him. And so, yeah, I still draw on that. It's still, I want him now. It's more about, to me, it's about him seeing me work hard. You know, it's about him seeing me do what I do. It's like, hey, dad spends a lot of time on the bike. Dad works out. He does this, you know, and I want that to be an inspiration to him. So I still, excuse me, I still draw on him for that motivation, but it took me a while to find that, you know, because it did after everything seemed muted after that big event. You know, it was like, hey, we made it. Now what? And everything seemed muted for a long time, and I really did struggle with that. So I'm really glad you asked that, because it is a struggle, and I think that anyone listening to this, it's something that you need to be aware of. You know, it can be hard, but you can definitely find that motivation again.
Yeah, nobody has bulletproof motivations, and we shouldn't make ourselves feel like we should, and we shouldn't assume that other people do. You know, it's
Yeah.
always, it ebbs and flows. You know, what you said there really resonates with me, and I think of that pretty regularly. You know, and just looking at you with my son, I want my son to know that, you know, yeah, sure, even though it's for silly little blue ribbons, or not even that, you know, with bike racing, who knows, you may get like a tire lever or something, right? But I want him to know that the hard work does pay off, in the sense that it makes you a better person, you know. And what I think of when I think of your situation is, you were training and fighting for your son to survive.
Yeah.
And what you're doing now is fighting and training to teach your son how to live, right?
Yeah.
And it's just a really noble cause. Not saying that your son needs to become a cyclist that you know, does over unders once a week, but saying that, you know, your son knows that his dad knows that hard work pays off, and it's worth struggle, and it's worth those sort of things, you know.
Yep.
It's all this bike racing thing and training thing is all just a metaphor for the larger issue of life, right? That's all
Absolutely.
it really is.
No, that's absolutely it. You know, and even to further that point, I want him to know that there is more to doing the hard work and riding bikes or whatever the sport is. There's more to it than just the sport. Because like I said earlier, the things that I pulled from my training, especially during that first base phase, have been just paramount to so many parts of my life after it. And I mean, I want him to know that, you know, yeah, you struggle, things are struggles, but you are stronger than you realize, which, I mean, he's 8 now, and he probably doesn't realize how much stronger he is than he realizes. But I mean, because he's literally the strongest person I know. I mean, just his drive. All kids who deal with any sort of just, we should all be in awe of kids who have to deal with things that adults struggle with, because they are absolutely, kids are amazing. They're amazing.
Yeah, you know, they lack that perspective that a lot of adults have, and it's got pluses and minuses.
Yeah,
you know, because they can march right through. And a lot of the time, you know, we may overthink things or try to justify things and change it around, but their earnestness and their pureness of heart is inspiring for sure.
agreed.
Cam, you're a successful athlete, one of the most successful athletes I've ever met, because what you've accomplished is sustaining life, and what an incredible thing. If you were to share one thing with, and sorry, I'm putting you on the spot here, but if you were to share one thing that you've learned from your training experience with other people that may be struggling with motivation or maybe not, who knows, what would you share with them?
Man, honestly, it's never give up. I know it's cliche and it sounds corny, and I get that, but I mean, honestly, it's just, that's what it is. Don't give up. Don't give up. You have everything that it takes to be successful, regardless of what that success means for you. And do it. Just fight. I mean, like I said, you learn so much more about yourself by burying yourself into this kind of stuff, and that it's huge. It's huge.
Absolutely. Awesome, Cam. Thanks so much. If anybody wants to find out more about this episode, talk to Cam. He's always on the TrainerRoad forum too. So he's present there. You can go to the TrainerRoad forum, which is trainerroad.com/forum, or you can just search for it on Google and find it that way. And you can look for episode 4 of the Successful Athletes podcast with Cameron Summerson, and you'll be able to see all the information from this one and ask any questions you might have. This is an awesome podcast. I'm so motivated to train. I can't wait to go do it right now. And I want to spend time with my son and let him know how much he means to me too. So this is just
Absolutely.
awesome. Thanks, Cam. Appreciate it. And if you enjoyed this one, please let us know down below. Give us a thumbs up if you're watching the YouTube video, and please share it with other people, so then other people can become inspired and become faster cyclists too, and just better human beings overall. So thanks, everybody. We'll talk to you next time.